my first paper that was out in 1991. The big puzzle then was, where's all this Japanese money coming from? Because in the 1980s, Japanese money had been flooding the world, buying up everything in the US, Hawaii, in Europe, plants, factories being established all over the world.
Manhattan.
Japanese money, yes, Manhattan, Pebbles Beach Golf Course, World Trade. What was it in Manhattan? The one of the big buildings. I mean,
was it the land under Rockefeller Center?
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember that.
All sorts. And so the intriguing thing was, where did all this money come from? Because it was actually more money than any economic theory would tell you should be coming from Japan. And also they weren't really earning much money on it. So it was against the economic incentives. And nobody could explain it. And they had, these standard models of capital flows didn't work. And so I wanted to solve that puzzle. And at the peak in 1987, Japanese long-term capital outflows were, it was a world record amount, unprecedented. It was twice as large as the already world record current account surplus. Where was the money coming from? And so I researched that, and the answer to that gave me an answer to many other things, including enabled me to warn later in 1991 that Japanese banks, which at that time were the biggest in the world, and the top 20 banks in the world were all Japanese by assets,
Top 20 banks in the world were all Japanese. This is 1991.
Yes, exactly.
This is right at the end of Reagan's 2 terms.
Yes, and at the end of this, Japanese economic boom, and also Japanese money flooding the world, and people were talking about the Japanese century now beginning, which didn't quite happen, but it took people a long time to realize this. But so at that time, when Japanese banks were top and the economy is growing at 7%, there was a bit of a glitch in the stock market. Stock prices had fallen a bit, 20%, 25%, 30%, a bit more. But then the Bank of Japan in 91 was lowering interest rates, and most people thought, well, that's the signal. Now buy Japanese stocks.
Right.
And that's when I put out my first paper. My conclusion was, don't buy Japanese stocks. Japanese banks are likely to go bankrupt, and Japan is likely to move into the biggest recession since the Great Depression. And you should short Japanese stocks, which I also did at the time.
And they knew it, which is why they were buying hard assets all around the world, like real estate.
And the answer to the question, where did they get the money from, is actually they just created it out of nothing. Because I uncovered at the time the process that actually drives all of our economies. And of course, I found out in the Japanese case, economic growth is something you get only when there's also money creation going on. But money creation for GDP, your economy, gross domestic product, that's how we measure the economy. So money creation that is used for investment and so on in the economy, for transactions fueling GDP. If that increases, you get more GDP, more nominal GDP. Of course, if money creation goes into asset purchases, you get an asset bubble. So I discovered this mechanism. And what is the money creation? Most people think it's the government that creates the money supply. Actually, much later, I did a survey with my students in Frankfurt. We asked over 1,000 people, sort of, in central Frankfurt, so probably above average educational levels. And the question was, who do you think creates and allocates the majority of the money supply? And then give them some options. And of course, being in Frankfurt includes the Bundesbank, the German central bank, the ECB at that time as well, also in Frankfurt, but the German government, all sorts of options. And 84% responded, well, it's either the government or the central bank, one of those, ECB, Bundesbank. That's what 84% thought. And of course, that's wrong, because the reality is governments don't create any money these days. That task has been given away, delegated. That power has been given away by the people, from the people, to somebody else. Central banks, well, they do create some money, essentially the paper money, the cash, but that's usually around only 2 to 3% of the money supply. So the question is, who creates the 97% of the money supply that is fueling the economy, asset markets, if you do it correctly, creating economic growth? Well, it comes from the banks. Banks create money. When a bank gives out a loan, it's not using existing money. It's not using deposits. It is actually newly creating money out of nothing. So a bank loan is always new money creation, new purchasing power is given to the borrower and added to the money supply. And this is new purchasing power that didn't exist before. Now, once you understand that, then you start to see how things fit together.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.